Crude oil is the world's primary source of fuel and also the largest source of primary energy. Global oil consumption in 2020 was estimated to be 88.6 million barrels per day, or 30.1% of global primary energy consumption. Asphalt, tar, diesel, jet fuel, gasoline, and lubricating oils are all made from crude oil. Oil reserves refers to the estimated amount of unrecoverable crude oil in a certain nation that can be extracted using modern technology and at a price that makes sense given the current oil price. The US needs to buy more oil from many other oil-producing nations since it is both the world's greatest oil user and producer. Even though the United States leads the world in oil production, its total available oil reserves rank 9th. Before we get into the video, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you're new. Now let's begin. Venezuela. Venezuela possesses the greatest oil reserves in the world, estimated to be more than 300 billion barrels. However, a combination of US sanctions, an ongoing economic crisis, and mismanagement has hindered the nation's ability to fully capitalize on its oil wealth. The Venezuelan economy was severely damaged by the first oil price drop of the new millennium. Following a period of prosperity in the 1990s and early 2000s, the US hit it with sanctions before it could recover, which severely reduced output. In 2022, the average was 600,000 to 700,000 barrels of oil per day. On average, 600,000 barrels of oil per day were exported. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the largest member of OPEC and the second largest oil producer in the world, has proven reserves of over 267 billion barrels. Production peaked in 2022 at 11.5 million barrels per day after rising to a little over 9 million in 2021. However, as part of the most recent round of OPEC+ output cutbacks, production was recently reduced by 500,000 barrels per day. In 2027, the monarchy intends to increase its production capacity from the present 12 million barrels per day to 13 million barrels per day while maintaining strict control over output. Iran. Iran produces about 2.39 million barrels of oil per day and has 208.6 billion barrels of reserves, according to OPEC figures. Of these, it only exports slightly more than 760,000 bpd. Undoubtedly, the significant discrepancy in reserves, output, and exports may be attributed to the re-imposed US sanctions on Iran by the previous government. Iran has been exporting more petroleum, exceeding 1.13 million barrels of oil per day in late 2022, and continuing to rise this year despite the sanctions and the fruitless attempts to lift them. Additionally, there are plans to increase output. Canada. Canada possesses 171 billion barrels of crude oil, the majority of which are bitumen from oil sands. 166.3 billion of the total are oil sands, mostly in Alberta. That represents a tenth of the oil reserves around the globe. Canada had a record-breaking daily average of almost 5 million barrels last year. Remarkably, despite efforts by the federal government to limit the business because of its carbon footprint, output is increasing, but producers continue to pump because of the need for oil. Iraq. Iraq, the second largest producer in OPEC, produces over 4.5 million barrels per day and has proved reserves of about 145 billion barrels. Iraq exports 3.4 million barrels per day on average, but like Kuwait, it has great intentions. Economists predict that Baghdad will not be able to match the output of Saudi Arabia, a larger OPEC member, since production capacity is expected to peak at about 6.3 million barrels per day during the next 5 years. United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates, the third largest oil producer in OPEC, produces 2.7 million barrels of crude oil per day on average. With an estimated stockpile of 111 billion barrels, based on data from OPEC, it exports 2.3 million barrels per day. The United Arab Emirates is not only a significant producer of oil and the custodian of some of the world's largest reserves, but it is also a prime example of an economy that is diversifying away from its primary export goods. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, has become a sought-after destination for high-end travel and technology due to its huge oil reserves. Kuwait. Kuwait has proven oil reserves of about 101.5 billion barrels. The small Gulf state produces and exports around 1.7 million barrels of oil per day, ranging from 2.4 million to 2.67 million barrels per day. The government has ambitious intentions for its oil wealth. Kuwait Petroleum Corporation intends to increase the nation's production capacity to up to 4 million barrels per day by 2030. It is evident that Kuwait is unconcerned about forecasts that indicate the end of oil consumption. Russia. Russia produced around 9.4 million barrels of crude oil per day, excluding condensates, and had proven crude oil reserves of over 80 billion barrels, according to the EIA. Russia was producing more than 11 million barrels per day, including condensates, a few years ago, but a response was taken, including a production cut, in reaction to the invasion of Ukraine and the Western sanctions that followed. However, petroleum and oil exports are back to what they were before the war. Libya. The estimated resource of crude oil in the North African nation is 48.3 billion barrels. However, with an average daily production of only 1.2 million barrels, it is a very small producer. Libya has continuously struggled to maximize its oil resources, mostly due to political instability and power disputes among various factions following the civil war. However, it appears that things could be about to change, as Europe is turning to the North African nation for a more substantial oil supply. United States of America. Estimates of the United States crude oil reserves vary across authorities. These are estimated by some at somewhat less than 36 billion barrels by the Energy Information Administration, which also counts condensate reserves differently. According to the World Population Review, the United States has 68.8 billion barrels of reserves total since they combine the counting of crude and condensates. Condensates and crude together total around 74 billion barrels. According to EIA estimates, it is nonetheless the world's largest producer of crude oil.